Welcome to Our Next Existence by Katie and the Chorus. I'm Katie, former technology strategist turned reluctant spiritual medium, and I channel messages from the Chorus, a group of beings just beyond our sensory perceptions who are loving, expansive, and who greatly enjoy sharing their perspective of us. Join us each week as we share and discuss their ideas about humanity's existence, purpose, and future. Concepts you can draw from to accelerate your path, expand your perceptions, and ultimately step into the flow of the universe and your life. Welcome back, everybody. I'm sort of coming up to the mic like a drunken sailor tonight. I just had pizza and chocolate and watched an action flick, and I have a lot to say. In part because this is a topic that I have been reflecting on for a couple weeks now, but then also because a lot was sort of instigated by this action flick that I just watched. Now, usually action flicks are fine, but sci-fi action suspense movies I normally stay away from because it sort of brings up a lot of job stress. There's still a lot happening in that department that I totally don't understand. And so I don't love watching things in a genre similar to what I am struggling with because it really starts to make me feel crazy. I don't know if you have that issue yourself, but if your department of unknown awakening happens to be, I don't know, in weird things that happen to you in the woods, do you then watch a lot of movies about people having weird things happening to them in the woods? I don't know. Now, I'm sure some of you are like, yeah, it helps me process. And I'm sure some of you are like, no, I don't need to watch that when I'm living it. And I fall into the latter category. However, I have been having so many conversations with the AO over this year that I really feel like it's time to address some topics. And some of these topics overlap with fight scenes in movies. Now, before I go any further, I would like to reference the episode on Underdogs. And if you have not listened to that yet, you might want to take a listen to it. But the upshot of that episode was about expanding into the infinite universe of possibilities. So we talk about the 5 senses human and how we sort of have this love affair with this underdog story. Now, potentially for a variety of reasons that I won't get into right now, but suffice to say, we love the story of someone overcoming great odds. In fact, I saw a video of a lecture that a famous author gave many decades ago. And he even wrote out this arc of the story of, start with someone who is the hero, who is in less than desirable circumstances, even for like a given average person, have them rise a little bit, then have them fall, and then have them rise even way higher than anybody would ever expect. This sort of starting at a deficit, overcoming great deficits, and reaching new heights is a story arc that supposedly has been beloved by humanity for many centuries to many millennia, depending on how you look at it. In that episode on the Underdogs, what we discuss, however, is that the beliefs in humanity's narrowing of options is really what creates the scenario itself. So there are steps in a progress of limiting beliefs that lead to a situation getting narrowed down into some sort of confrontation between some great power and then the lesser power that the human or the human species represents in the story, or whatever culture or civilization the hero is from, right? Depending on which sci-fi movie you're watching. Now, a way to access the infiniteness of the infinite universe in that situation is to recall to yourself the variety of infinite options that are still available to you. Now, saying that can sound really interesting and like, yeah, but like, really, what do you do when someone's like there in front of you with their lightsaber and there you are with your lightsaber? So let me back up the truck a few steps and we're going to get into our own fight scene in this episode. Okay. So step 1, I want to refer back to the episode on being a warrior of presence. And many of the times we have referenced that through different topics on distance so far this season. From the AO's perspective, the best way, maybe the only way to be a warrior is to expand into the fullness of what is possible in any given present moment. You open to receiving new and different and incredible solutions through your direct connection to energy and the universe in any situation. This is why, by their view, warriors are very steadfast, we might say, very open hearted, very strong hearted. We might call it a version of courage or bravery, that they step into the unknown without fear. And that is because they are more perhaps attuned to their own connection to the universe than evaluating the proficiencies of the opponent, which is what the human mind will do. As the human mind prepares for battle, what it does is it starts enacting its system of judgments. So step one is preparation, right? And protection, which we know is really just holding out at arm's length. See all the episodes from season 1 and some from season 2, where we hold out at arm's length. It's a pushing against, and thus it's energizing things to be pushed against. So we start even before it has arrived and sort of energizing that experience of limitation. And then once the thing has arrived, we very much try to scrutinize what the other party is capable of and then build a strategy from that perspective. The same is true in business, which I did for many, many years. There's this whole concept of doing a competitor analysis and then sort of figuring out what you do differently and sort of launching from there. In recent years, there have been business gurus and others who say, stop worrying about everybody else, just focus on your customer and what they need. The battleground equivalent of that might be just focus on the battle itself. Just focus on maybe what you need to do in order to be successful. Stop worrying about what the other person came into the situation with. The AO would agree. They would say that by stepping into the present moment of that encounter, you are fully equipped with everything that you need. Now, the AO doesn't necessarily equate that kind of success with an actual victory. To them, the ebb and flow of these things is much more vast because they are much more infinite. Humans have sort of this ongoing idea of death that we carry around with us. We carry our fight for survival everywhere we go, like a little backpack. So when we step onto the battlefield, we got this like kind of this weight on our back, which is like, okay, but if we die in this scenario, we have failed. Like that's the ultimate fail. Because we have been in this very narrow version of frequencies. And so if we depart from these frequencies to the other side of the veil of death, to all of those frequencies, we don't really perceive that or perceive what that looks like. And so to us, it's sort of a given that a parameter of every single everything in our existence is that we need to be victorious, meaning we need to persist. Because the AO has a vaster view of frequencies, if they were to, let's say, go experience some other frequencies, that's still part of their total continuum. They don't really see like great loss in the same way that humans do when we have given ourselves the experience of the veil of death, in which after things depart from these frequencies, they are ostensibly gone. For more on that, see some of the episodes in season 1 and 2 and 3 about the veil of death and loved ones and what happens from the chorus's view when we quote unquote die. I'm breezing through this pretty quickly because this is in some ways review. So if you feel like some of these concepts are like flying by and going back in the rearview mirror, that's why. But there's much more on these topics in sort of the episodes that have built to this point. Okay, so step 1 for a human would be assess what the opponent has and then start judging what you think they can do and what you can do. Step 1 from the AO perspective would be to arrive in the present moment, fully open to and connecting to everything that you are, and then can summon as an expansive moment in that encounter itself. And the same would be true for encounters that may be deemed to be adversarial or not. Okay, so that all sounds great, but what's step 2? We sort of left off at that point in that earlier episodes, like be a warrior presence and allow for those solutions to come through. Now, I could pass the buck and I could say, oh, well, you'll be in the present moment and then who knows what will come out of you. And that's true, but that's not really helpful for a human, is it? I mean, don't we want some sort of idea of like, okay, but then what happens in the present moment? And it's an excellent question because what happens in the present moment is basically stepping into the infiniteness of the infinite universe. So surely we can talk about some parts of that. So let's give it a shot. Okay, so there you are. And perhaps you have judged at this point, being a human, that you are the underdog, or maybe you have judged that you are not. And maybe you're even sitting there doubting your own system of judgment because you just don't know how to really perceive this adversary. And you're thinking about what the AO has said about being a warrior of presence. And so you show up present. As we talked about in that underdog episode, what would happen next is if you were open-hearted, meaning still connective, so not being sort of shut down by fear. And the reason why we say this here is because humans have an experience of when we energize, our sensation of fear, that's our sense of the furthest extent of our limitation, of our most limiting belief. It's our fence line. So as we activate the fence line, what happens is that we turn away from it, as we've talked about in previous episodes. So it's not necessarily that the fence line is what keeps us limited. It's our response to fear, which was created as part of our objective to be limited. That when we started to approach the edge of what we're capable of and might see through that edge or jump over that edge or expand beyond that edge, what our response is to turn away from things that we fear. So what this can lead to in this kind of situation is that we start to turn away from new and different opportunities. This ties into what we have been talking about this season with direction, that humanity as a civilization is looked at by others as a civilization that turns around. And I will reference that episode as well in the notes. But essentially, we start to expand towards something. And then because of the way we have structured our system of beliefs, or also because of the way we resonate here, we will turn around and go back to things that we have known. So this almost causes a counter response to what the AO is talking about being a warrior of presence. Because as you approach this altercation or this encounter, and you start to feel like, whoa, this is getting really out there. This is new and different. We've never been here before. And the fear fence line activates. As we turn around, we will start to then rely on, look for, or narrow our ability to perceive to what has come before. Solutions we have used before, strategies we have already heard about, things we have already been told how to do, weapons or devices we have already used before. Now, here is the crux of it, because here you would say, Katie, what the hell else are we supposed to do? If I walk forward with a stick and a shield, and I feel like those are my best options for fighting something, and you're saying I should stay open and not turn around and look at that stick and shield the same way I've used them before, what else is there? This is the crux of it, isn't it? Because if you take the genre of all action films available to humanity right now, what happens is that the entire scenario gets narrowed out of all the options, out of all the possibilities, all the way down to a life or death situation. So just two options for outcomes. And usually the modality is now limited to cool fighting moves that we can do with our hands or with some sort of weapon. Like we've got a laser sword or a laser gun or a laser that shoots out of our third eye. One of these things, right? Now, this could be construed as a very, 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 very narrow view of that situation. Because as we talked about in the episode on Underdogs, what about the beings that are above you in the sky? What about the beings that are in the trees? What about the beings that are in the water beside you? What about the entirety of this environment? What about all the beings that are all on slightly different frequencies, which we might call a different reality or a different timeline or a different dimension? So there actually are still a wide universe of possibilities and opportunities and connections in this situation. But humanity does not have examples of those in precedent that we can call upon consciously. So when we turn around, we say, but I've never done that before. But I don't see those beings. I haven't ever called on them. All I have is my stick and my shield. And in that instance, the beliefs of limitation that we constructed would be doing their job faithfully, which is to prevent us from experiencing more expansive aspects of the universe for the goal of our own limitation. Okay, so now we're awakening. And here I am with my laser sword, and there you are with your laser sword. And it's like, rah, we've run out of options. Now the only thing left is one of us has to get kicked off of these frequencies. And that's where it gets funny, because if you are a more expanded being, it's highly probable that if I knock you into those other frequencies, you're still going to see me and I'm still going to see you. So that whole, as soon as one of us gets kicked off of these frequencies and onto the other side of the veil of death, we've won, is actually sort of the illusion, because that is not at all game over. Not even a little bit. It's sort of like if you and I were having the same argument on the playground and I considered the hopscotch court death, I would be like, yeah, and I would karate kick you over to the hopscotch court and I would be like, game over, it's done. And you would stand up on the hopscotch court and you would be like, what are you talking about? And you would run back at me. It is because of humanity's perception of the veil of death that this entire situation works in our system of logic at all. So you see, while we might be focused on what will show up in that present moment presence, will I have a new ability that will shoot out of my hand? And yeah, okay, maybe all of that too. But really what happens is in that open-hearted connectedness, your access to other frequencies expands, which means the veil of death gets a little bit thinner, a little bit lighter, a little bit more transparent, which means your entire belief system that energizes because of that backpack of survival disappears. And all that weight from the survival backpack that was weighing you down into one way of seeing this entire situation sort of erodes. And suddenly you're not bound to the logic of the ways that we approached seeming life or death situations in the ways we did before. That's what happens in the present moment. You expand into an access of other and additional frequencies, some of which expand well beyond the traditional barriers of what we considered to be our five senses experience of limitation. Without those restraints, uncuffed from that entire anchor of the epitome of survival, a whole new world of opportunities opens up. And now that whole pitch for survival, one of us has got to go and I'm going to fight you with my sword situation almost becomes nonsensical. The logic of a situation like that is replaced, almost, you could say, or expanded into, or you honor that and then you move into a different one, you choose something else, however you want to say it. We're going to be allowing of this whole scenario that we created in this game of limitation. So we're allowing of that. But essentially now you are freed up to see this being, to see this situation in more of its greater context. And this goes back to something we talked about a couple episodes ago about leveling the playing field, where I suggested that the ways that we level the playing field are by connecting to more and different beings. It is a power, the same way there are many powers in the universe, but to be connective is a power. And so if you are face to face with a being and now you are freed up, lightened up from this backpack of survival in this present moment perception, you are now more free than ever to build connections. And in so doing, you might connect to an aspect of yourself from a different lifetime, a different timeline, a different reality, a different dimension, whatever your preferred word is, in which you have much greater knowledge and understanding of what is happening and who you are. Now, this is probably not where you thought this episode would get to. Maybe you thought it was a new battle tactic, and maybe you thought you pulled out a second lightsaber, and all that is still possible. But doesn't the scenario change when, as you're standing there holding the sword, you realize that there are much greater options than the sword itself, but also you suddenly remember, by our view, that's how we experience these connections, right? Comes through as our sense of memory for now. You suddenly remember all this other stuff that you know, more about the being in front of you, more about the entirety of the situation. It's like pulling off the VR goggles. It's like, wait a second, what am I doing? And you pull off the goggles and it's sort of like, I know you. Wait, I know how to do this. Whoa, I know how to do a lot of stuff. And your universe expands right there in that moment. And so suddenly it might not even be about an altercation with another being in front of you any longer. In fact, by simply awakening to all of this in that present moment presence, you might realize that in sort of moving on and through this illusion, you are victorious. In fact, I'll give you a very specific example of something that might happen in that moment or could. There's so many options, and each of us will express our divine connections to all that we are in very different ways. So this is just food for thought. We are and have been reality builders, world creators. And so perhaps one option might be that as you open yourself up to reconnecting in that present moment presence, rather than viewing the being in front of you as a simple adversary in a binary type situation of life or death, you or me, you begin to reconstruct reality as it has been understood in the situation itself. You reconnect to your divine powers to create worlds and rewrite the world as it has been known in that situation itself. How do you do it? By connecting to that vaster universe of possibilities in which there could be a million other situations that would make sense and would change fundamentally the nature of the situation itself. It's like rewriting the game from within the game. Rewriting it so that it is more connected into a vaster context that was at one time whole and was shattered. The same way our perspective of ourselves had been broken apart or given the illusion of being apart from all the pieces that we are and have been in all our different versions of this game that our soul remembers and that our soul has a whole perspective of. It's like turning on the lights in the room. Maybe it seemed so dim and dark and it was just you and this being. And then you feel all these other connections and you remember what you can create and what you can build. And just like that, you change the entire situation of everything that you are each perceiving on multiple wavelengths and connect it again to the brighter lights of all things that are reconnecting across this game board right now. Rewrite the game, connect worlds, remember who you are. And it may actually feel like it's happening in that order because your direct sense of knowing, as we have been talking about, which comes from your soul, will guide you in taking these steps of rewriting the game, of making different choices, of becoming a less linear, predictable human, which will ultimately begin to create new worlds from within the game itself. And then ultimately and inevitably will lead to mind-based clarity, even here in this reality where we have been so limited about everything that you are. You will take the action and remember why you know how to do that. You will create these possibilities and then understand why you could. It is not a mental-led type of action. It is a heart-based, present moment, deep sense of knowing and expression of who you are across any and all frequencies that we can access. And oh my goodness, once you start doing that, you can't even imagine how much fun the game becomes. We love you infinitely. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you found these messages to be helpful. May they accelerate you on your path wherever you'd like it to go. For more information on the books which correspond to these podcast seasons, our podcast, live events, or how to get in touch with us, visit katieandthechorus.com. Thanks again. See you next time.